Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair, this is Alex.
Hello.
And today we're going to be discussing the United Nations and the absurd vote regarding a Palestinian state.
Yeah, we're also going to be looking at Columbia University, where there's been open support for Hamas, open antisemitism. Jews have been blocked from going to the university, and it's caused quite a lot of chaos.
And also we're going to be talking about Passover and its importance for the Jewish people, also its significance for Christians, and why the phrase "let my people go" has a special relevance at this time. So let's begin with the United Nations, and there was a significant vote at the UN last week, wasn't there?
Yeah, so the United Nations Security Council, they voted as to whether the state of Palestine should be accepted as a full member at the United Nations.
So no terms of borders, Israel's agreement, conditions, nothing like that.
No, nothing like that. This was just, I mean, to be fair, this was recognition of the state of Palestine within the United Nations itself, but it goes a long way to full recognition as a state.
Absolutely.
And so I think, yeah, fortunately, the vote was nullified by a United States veto. But I think it shows how close they got to it, because actually...
Well, just one country, the United States.
Yeah.
And if you imagine if the United States hadn't exercised that veto, or the veto didn't exist, then, it could be a different story. And the ramifications, which we're not going to necessarily talk about at length today, but it would have been hugely significant. And when you consider the whole timing of it,
I know.
Just as Israel, experienced probably one of the largest ever missile attacks, certainly the largest ballistic missile attack in the, in history, by a state which is intent and by its own admission wants to wipe out the entire nation of Israel.
Yeah.
And Hamas also, if it could, would.
Yeah.
I mean, when you consider all these things happening, and yet the United Nations is intent on trying to undermine Israeli sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. It is troubling, because these are meant to be the people at the top of the world, really, who are sort of, helping to guide the world in a direction that you would hope is the right one. But obviously they're not, because I think they're misguided. I mean, the United Nations Security Council is made up of 15 nations, and 5 of those nations can veto. So Russia, China, France, the UK, and America. They're the 5 that can veto.
Good question is, what about the United Kingdom? Did we use our veto?
We did not. And we abstained. So there were 12 nations that voted for it, 2 nations that voted, that abstained, the UK being one of them. And then the US was the one who voted no. But as we know from a UN resolution a couple of weeks ago, the UN abstained from that one and it passed against Israel.
Yes.
Just imagine if the US actually abstained this time.
Well, Britain should have voted no, at least, even if it didn't use a veto, knowing that the US was going to. They should have voted no. They abstained. And it is interesting because Liz Truss, last week on her rounds of the media promoting her new book, gave an interview in which she explained that while she was Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister, she had to intervene on several occasions in order for the UN to vote more favourably towards Israel.
Yeah.
She also expressed some concern that Foreign Office could be even more supportive of Israel.
Yeah.
Quite an interesting insight there from someone who, of course, was our Prime Minister at one point for a very short period, but was also had quite a significant period of time as Foreign Secretary of this country. And, here we have another example of the UK, sitting on the fence at the United Nations when we should be taking a leading role in showing our support for Israel politically as much as we were prepared to do militarily just a few days prior.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we literally were defending Israel militarily against threat of annihilation. And then when it comes to dividing up the land of God, we're happy to sit on the fence and actually allow the world to chop up the land of Israel,
Which is also unbiblical in every sense of the word, as much as it is a lacking of common sense and respect.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, it goes back to Joel 3, verses 1 to 2, where this is God speaking. And he says, "For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there, on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land." So this is clearly God saying, I will judge the nations that divided up my land. And this was, you may think, it's only 15 nations. Well, actually, the majority of United Nations countries do actually recognize Palestine as a state. This was the UN Security Council. What people may not understand is that when the United Nations General Assembly votes, it's all 193 nations who are voting together. They are not legally binding resolutions. But when the Security Council, which is just the 15 nations voting, they are legally binding resolutions. So what happens is when a United Nations Security Council resolution is passed, it becomes international law.
Right.
So therefore, this was very close to actually becoming international law that Palestine was recognized as a state.
Wow. So it's hugely significant.
Hugely significant.
Imagine the impression that would have had on history if Britain had really, just sat on the fence. Because there are reasons. There are reasons regarding, because not least because of the timing of having this discussion, but also because of Israel's security, respecting Israel's rights to determine its borders, as well as the biblical basis. And the biblical basis is something which we as Christians really need to get a grip of, because if there is to be a Christian voice of saying whether or not we support or do not support this, the world needs to hear the Christian view, and the Christian view, by the way, is the biblical view.
Exactly.
We align with what the Jewish people also regard as God's covenant, God's promise in terms of his his promise towards Israel, which includes land, and that's something we must not divide in our theology as Christians. Is God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the Jewish people, their descendants, an everlasting, unbreakable promise by God who keeps all of his promises, but also the significance of that attached to the land which he has given to his people.
Exactly. The other thing I would say as well, I agree 100% with that. It is definitely a biblical thing that we're standing on, where God is warning about dividing up the land. But also, if you look at international law, if you look at the United Nations Charter, there are specific things within current international law which actually say that the land of Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, cannot actually be divided unless there is a agreement between Israel and the other parties. Actually, it's, the onus is upon Israel to make an agreement with the Palestinians for any land that is divided up, and it's up to them alone. So actually, this UN Security Council resolution, I think they've done it in the past where they've actually gone against international law while passing resolutions and things like that. I just think it is
because they make their own rules.
Well, they make their own rules. Yeah, this is the thing. When you've got 15 nations basically voting with a bias, they can override rules, and international law then becomes meaningless, really. But when it comes to the UN Charter, that UN Charter is something that all 193 nations have signed. Yeah. They have all agreed to it. They've all agreed that within that there is a binding international law, which is that the disputed territories will be agreed upon by the parties that are involved within them, meaning Israel and the Palestinians, and no one else is allowed to enforce that upon them.
Yes. So actually, international law is only valuable if it is honoured.
Yeah.
And if there is a precedent where, the UN is prepared to undermine its own laws and rules, then actually it just makes it all farcical, really.
Yeah, exactly.
You're absolutely right, because it's not just Israel's security, but it is also the honor and respect of existing law and the agreement with which Israel, because the pressure is for Israel to always comply with international law, and it does, despite what we might hear in the media and such. Israel does keep within international law. There's this weight of expectation, and yet it is prepared. The UN is prepared to not honor international law when it comes to Israel. And as an ally, right, of Israel here at the United Kingdom, we have a duty to honor our closest ally in the Middle East. And by abstaining on something as important to the state of Israel as this, because this is as important to the state of Israel as it is to the Palestinians. At least that's what we think it's important to the Palestinians. But it's hugely significant. It's very dishonorable to Israel that this should be happening. So let's hope that Britain is perhaps corrected, and that the America's example is one which we will follow in the future. But the UN does have a lack of moral compass, and it has had for a long time. And I just want to mention this particular thing because I think this is a great example, though it is absolutely outrageous. And that is, earlier in March this year, the UN disarmament conference was held, and the chairmanship of this is rotated. It's rotated in alphabetical order. And the conference, as it sounds, is discussing compliance and various agreements regarding armament or disarmament. And guess who was chair for 4 weeks? Alphabetical order. It comes to an I. It's not Israel. Okay. If you said Iran, you'd be right. Iran was chair for 4 weeks of the UN Conference of Disarmament. Okay. And during their 4 week of holding this position, the United Nations decided not to disarm, decided to send hundreds of ballistic missiles, drones, in order to try and attack Israel on a huge scale. This is also a regime that is breaching nuclear agreements and is growing closer by the day to having a nuclear weapon, a nuclear missile. So what is the UN thinking of? If the UN cannot stand up to a regime which has declared to wipe out another country and is putting them as chair over a disarmament committee, then what hope do we have? What hope does the UN have? So really, I think this should be criticised. The UN should be held to account for that. It is showing a bad example. It's showing no accountability whatsoever to Tehran. And yes, as Christians, my personal message really is like, do not place your hope in institutions, man-made institutions, whose core and center and foundation. And by the way, I think the foundation of the United Nations obviously goes back previously to the League of Nations. It came out of the, out of bringing nations together after World War II. So I might be wrong about the foundation, but right now, the core of the United Nations, its ethos, is against God.
100%.
And do not put your hope in man-made institutions that have removed God from its outwork, out of its beliefs and outworking.
I mean, it is the United Nations. We always make jokes about the UN name. What does it mean? Utter nonsense, useless numpties, all these different things. But the thing is, they constantly are
unbiblical.
Unbiblical, well, if you want to go that way, the UN is unbiblical.
Shall we move on? Keep going.
Oh yeah. So, but I was just going to say, this week, you said that whilst they were heading up the disarmament thing. They fired lots of arms at Israel, but also just this week, the United Nations announced, their inspectors announced that Iran was not months away from nuclear weapons. They were now weeks away.
Right.
And what that means, by the way, because for many years we've been saying they're months away, weeks away, and things like that. What it means is if they decide tomorrow, right, we're actually going to build the bomb now, it means it'll take them literally 3 weeks or something to build that weapon. Right now, they're not building that weapon because there's so many sanctions and pressures against them. But all the time, they're making themselves more efficient and getting closer to having, the enriched uranium that is needed. So it's not like, in 3 weeks' time they're going to have the bomb. No. It's actually, if they pull the trigger, it will take weeks. Whereas before it was months. Before that it was years. Now
so they're closer to readiness.
Yeah, they're closer to readiness. So if they literally say, right, if Khomeini literally says, make the bomb, they will literally have a few bombs. I think it's like 3 bombs within weeks, 6 within months.
That's very helpful to know
something.
that, because like a year ago we were saying they're certain percentage closer, and you think, well, they're dragging their heels. Are the sanctions taking effect? But from what you're saying is that they are still making progress in their view in the right direction.
Yeah.
Which is why Israel, when it responded, did so in a very targeted and measured way.
Yeah.
Obviously with lots of pressure coming from all sorts of directions to do that, but they successfully send a message to Iran that this sort of behavior will not be tolerated.
Yeah.
And actually, we've managed to do this within, I think I saw somewhere that Israel were able to do 10 times more damage to Iran than Iran's attack on Israel, with only 10% of the ammunition that Iran used.
Yeah, exactly.
So that just shows how, and I think Iran got the message.
Well, clearly, because even though they tried to play it off, they didn't even hurt us, there was nothing wrong.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah, well, this week, Khomeini actually gave the order, learn what Israel did so we can copy them. Because clearly what he did didn't work.
Praise God.
Yeah. And so he clearly is showing that actually what Israel did work, and he wants his people to learn so that they can do it back to Israel. So, but yeah, I mean, we could speak about the UN and Iran for a long time, but there are a lot of issues, especially within the United Nations, as to their treatment of Israel. And this is the thing, one of the ways in which the world will turn against Israel is through organizations like the United Nations. And I think even we're talking about the example of the UK and the Foreign Office, how sometimes the Foreign Office votes differently at the United Nations to how the government is acting, because there's a bit of a disconnect there. That actually, I think, happens throughout lots of different countries, where the Foreign Office of each country is acting in a different way at the UN to how they're actually
see that.
Yeah, so I think it is just one of these things where people put a high regard on the UN, and actually, ultimately, it is made up of a lot of nations that aren't following God. They're not being led by God, and obviously they're not going to make godly decisions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The latest issue of Torch magazine from Christians United for Israel UK is out now. Arm yourself with the truth about Israel with this free magazine, available to read online instantly or received by post if you live in the UK. In this issue, we describe the horrific events of 7th of October, when Hamas invaded Israel and massacred Jews, and why it is vital we bear witness of the evil antisemitism that was committed on that tragic day. We also explain the rise in antisemitism here in Britain and how Christians must respond. Plus, we look at whether the so-called two-state solution is actually a two-state delusion. Our magazine is packed with important facts to help you stand with Israel, but it also includes articles to encourage and inspire, such as the incredible story behind Israel's national emblem and its link to the Arch of Titus, plus what God says about the land he promised to the Jewish people. Get your copy today by going to cufi.org.uk/torch. So I think we need to talk about what has been happening at Columbia University in New York.
Yeah.
Perhaps some people in the United Kingdom might not be aware of the extent of what's happening at these protests and why they are significant.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shocking thing for people who do know. If you've looked online and looked at the Columbia University incidents, there's basically a large group of students at Columbia University in New York who are taking part in an anti-Israel protest at this time. It was an unplanned thing. They went to the main lawn where normally all these protests happen, and they set up camp, started their protest, but they hadn't had prior arrangement for it yet. So it became an issue where they were being told to leave and so forth. That then spurred them on to be even more sort of rebellious, I guess, in terms of their protest. And it sparked this big thing happening. But
it's huge, isn't it? I mean, there's tents.
Yeah, there's tents there. I mean, they've gone to online classes now. They're not having proper, studies at the school. It has disrupted the entire university.
Yeah.
But there's very clearly an outpouring of hatred from these students, which is not just anti-Semitic, it's pro-Hamas. It is wrong in every way, shape and form.
Yes.
And I mean, there was an incident, or there's multiple incidents where Jewish students, they're not Israeli, they're not promoting themselves as being pro-Israel, simply Jewish, wearing Jewish clothing. They are being refused entry into the university. So there's students locking arms and blocking these students from going in simply because they're Jewish. It is pure anti-Semitism. And it really does, like a lot of people online have been making these comparisons to the brown shirts and to the Nazi youth of, Germany, where Jews were banned and blocked from entering universities throughout Germany during the 1930s when the Nazi Party was rising up. And it's a tragic situation. I think this is just this is a hot spot right now for this, but I think it is something which we're seeing actually across the world.
Yes. And you say about, Jews that were identifiably Jewish being unable to get in or being, insulted and abused. No Jewish student should have to walk through that.
No.
In order to go to anywhere or go to university. And it is appalling. It reminded me also of that incident we saw in the news here in London with that Jewish man who the police officer, was warning him, threatened him with arrest, and said that he was openly Jewish.
Yeah.
Oh come on.
I know.
Jewish people should be allowed to be openly Jewish. We are living, supposedly in a free society, but not least this goes against the values that we hold dear in this country, but also in America. And let us not make excuses for these protesters. We can see quite clearly from their attitude towards, quote, openly Jewish people about where their heart is.
Yeah. I don't think it takes anyone with any intelligence to work out that they are anti-Semitic to the core. It wasn't just one Jewish student. There was lots of Jewish students who have been affected by this. There was a Jewish teacher who was stopped from entering. A professor, he was there, a lecturer trying to go and do his job. The university itself actually blocked his key card so he couldn't get into the university. They claimed it was for his protection, but when he confronted the actual, the heads of the university and things outside it, they didn't show any love towards him. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And I would say, there's something quite sinister about that. But these students, they're not just, they claim to be calling for freedom for Palestinians or to, have a ceasefire and things. Actually, that is not what they're calling for. So I'll just read out some of the chants which they're making. Hopefully the AI bots and the algorithm stuff won't pick up on some of these words I was saying, because basically it's open support for Hamas. So, for example, it says, Al-Qassam, you make us proud, take another soldier out. Obviously not perfect rhyming there. We say justice, you say how, burn Tel Aviv to the ground.
Oh.
Hamas, we love you, we support your rockets too. Like, this is this is thousands of students chanting this all together. Red, black, green, and white. We support Hamas's fight. They're not saying the Palestinian. Like, it is time to rebel. Al-Qassam, give them hell. It is right to rebel. Hamas, give them hell. Like, all of these things. This is.
Well, I mean, they're quite clear.
They're quite clear
for Hamas.
Exactly,
and which we've said all along.
Exactly, and they are on the streets chanting this. They're in subways chanting this. All around the university campus and things. They're disrupting. It's open support for terrorists on campuses, and I think this is a lot more widespread than what we think it is among the student populations.
Yes, and because we've been soft on slogans like "from the river to the sea," we are now seeing and we've said it all along, that these protesters have now received validation for their views because we haven't come down hard. Well, authorities haven't come down hard enough on these veiled anti-Semitic, slogans. I say veiled. I mean, if you think about the phrase literally, "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," it is calling for the destruction of Israel, but they deny it. And so this is what it leads to. It is a slippery slope, Alex.
I know.
And I think there have been arrests and things like that, but there is this cooking pot, this melting pot of ideas which are very much often contributed by the media. Because I went on to a BBC article, and one of the main images that they used was, in the description, was a Jewish student that was among the protesters. They had singled out this Jewish student, and look, they are overwhelming. This is the very small minority of these protesters are Jewish, but the BBC deliberately wanted to shift the angle to show, that, or kind of to undermine the anti-Semitism. And this is, this could lead onto something very, very serious indeed if this is not pushed back. And yet the media is trying its best to try and undermine and diminish the threat of anti-Semitism, not just the threat, but the actual evidence of anti-Semitism, which is manifesting itself in these circumstances.
I think it's absolutely appalling that media organizations like the BBC, who are, they are held to such a high standard, or they are thought of as such a high standard, are actually lowering themselves to that level, which is so dishonest. It is not accurate journalism. There are more Jews today who are fearful because of what is happening at Columbia University. There are more Jews who were stopped from entering the university than those who took part in any pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas protests. And again, this is the same narrative that is there, where they're trying to, I mean, it's happened all along. You heard it from Jeremy Corbyn's era, where he always says, we're not against the Jews, we're against Israel. They're trying to divorce Israel from the Jewish people. And they're trying to use Jews, like, we have friends who are Jews and they're on our side. The vast, vast majority of Jews understand that Israel is the Jewish people, right?
Yes.
Even though it's a nation, it has different people from different backgrounds and so forth. When we look at it from a biblical perspective, Israel and the Jewish people are synonymous with each other. And I think this is the plan that they have. They're trying to diminish the anti-Semitism. They're actually covering for anti-Semites.
They're legitimizing these protests, which are for Hamas.
Exactly.
Because if Jews are calling for support for Hamas, then this is not this is not an anti-Semitic issue.
Exactly.
This is what they're
trying to say.
This is what they're trying to say.
And this is the same as well, like with the anti-Israel lobby that is on the internet. They are using, for example, there was a Passover Seder that took place at this event. And so clearly there were maybe 5 to 10 Jews there, like from what I could see. they had a Seder meal and they passed around food for
We're talking about
people.
hundreds there.
Hundreds of them there. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is a university with thousands, tens of thousands of students, and, they only managed to get a handful of Jews there to sort of use as their example of, Jews support this. Well, Jews do not. On the whole, Jews do not support this. And any Jew who is supporting it is sadly mistaken, because they are siding with people who are seeking the destruction of Israel and, the support for Hamas there. Hamas wants to destroy the Jewish people wherever they are in the world. So it's like chickens for KFC. It is absolutely ridiculous for that sort of thing. And I think this is the thing, though, they're trying to do. They're trying to put a wedge between... I actually think they're trying to put a wedge between Israel and the Jews. I think they're trying to divide that out. And I think the same happens, by the way, with Christians and Jews.
Yes.
I think a lot of the time... I mean, we saw it a few weeks ago. We're not going to talk about it extensively now or anything, but there was an interview with Tucker Carlson where he interviewed a Christian Palestinian, and this is a Christian who is very anti-Israel, extremely anti-Israel, to the point where he's actually preaching unbiblical things. I watched a few of his sermons, and he is literally misquoting the Bible, misquoting God, using it for his narrative, and he's supporting the Palestinians to, I'm not going to say he supports Hamas, but he definitely is on the side of, he is far gone beyond replacement theology into being anti-Israel to the core kind of thing. And I think when you have that was a very misguided thing from Tucker Carlson to use that as this is a Christian viewpoint. Actually, the majority of Christians don't believe that. The guy wasn't even speaking from the Bible. He was speaking from his personal experience. And all I'm trying to say is there's these multiple attacks against Jews where they're trying to undermine the anti-Semitism of Hamas. They're trying to divorce Israel from the Jewish people. They're trying to build a wedge between Christians and Jews, between Christian nations and Israel. Like, there's all these different ways they're trying to sort of pervert the truth on the issue. The fact of the matter is, Jews are under threat from these people. Jews are the victims of anti-Semitism from these people, and these people are anti-Semites. They are Hamas supporters, and we should not beat around the bush about that. Like, they are...
I get distracted by it as well, which is what the BBC was trying to do in this situation.
Exactly. But unfortunately, most people who are reading the BBC, they're not Christian, they're not having a biblical understanding of it, they're just believing the BBC for what they write. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people deceived into thinking, it's not, the Jews are supporting this, or, Israel's not really the Jewish state, and all these different things, which I think is the plan. It is to fool the unwise. And fortunately, we have the Bible on our side. A lot of the people listening to this podcast will also be, being led by the Spirit, reading the Word of God, understanding things from a biblical perspective. They won't be deceived, but it's actually everyone else that is going to be. And I think it's just really sad that is the case.
Well, as Christians, understanding the Jewish roots of our faith is important in order to trying to root us down as Christians to not be swayed by these tactics, which the anti-Israel lobby and just the world generally is trying to use to cause division between Christians and Jews. And actually, historically, there has been a lot of damage caused by the division, separation of the Jewish roots of our Christian faith. And we still see some of the evidence of that. But I'm encouraged, and I say I'd like to believe, and I'm going to profess it, or confess it, that there is a move back towards the Bible, and the Bible, I mean, that's a good start, isn't it? But also a recognition of the value that the Jewish people have made in terms of us as Christians understanding and having a revelation of our own faith that we've come into, and appreciating it in a way that we can see let's take the Passover, because we've mentioned the Passover, and it is currently the Jewish people are celebrating Passover.
Yep.
But I hope that Christians listening and watching this will recognize the huge importance of Passover in understanding what Christ has fulfilled at Calvary, becoming our Passover lamb, observing the Passover, and all of the symbolism and richness of understanding that. But just focusing on the Passover itself and recognizing that right now the Jewish people are observing the Passover, which is an instructed ordinance in which the Jewish people remember their deliverance from out of captivity in Egypt, from the hands of Pharaoh, led by Moses, and brought out by God through the Red Sea. And it was there that that the Passover was instituted. Of course, marked by that miraculous event where the blood was posted onto the doorposts of every home of every Israelite there in Egypt, and they were protected from the wrath of God, it says.
Yeah.
A huge significant thing that the Jewish people still to this day remember in terms of when God protected his people and delivered his people. Those words, let my people go, are words which resonate, I think, today in a particularly special way, unique way, because whilst we are celebrating everything that Passover means from a biblical perspective, we are humbled to recognize that those words have perhaps a different meaning, or similar meaning, I should say, in that there are the children of Israel that are members of the children of Israel that are right now, as we speak, as we listen and watch this podcast, are in captivity in Gaza, where the brutality of Hamas have subjugated these innocent Jewish people, from babies to elderly people in their 80s, and are still, after more than now 200 days, are being held hostage, and we demand upon Hamas, and we call upon the international community to do everything that they can. And of course, our heart goes heavenwards in prayer that his people will be freed from that captivity.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about the Jewish roots of our faith, and about how there's so much symbology within the Passover meal, and all those things. It was actually my first ever time this year having a Passover Seder, or Passover meal. And this was obviously a Christian version of that, because we did it in our church, and it was Christ in the Passover, or Jesus in the Passover. And it was so interesting as a Christian. And obviously I'm sort of well versed in my understanding of Judeo-Christian sort of beliefs and all the rest of it, but there were people even within the church who probably weren't aware so much. We had young and old there. You know, my children experienced it for the first time and things, and it was a way of opening their eyes to sort of the connection that we have to the Jewish people and to Israel. And there was just so much symbology there, that it really does sort of make you wonder how Christians cannot see the importance of Judaism within our Christian faith. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of put that there. Yeah. But again, like looking back at what you're saying, there's almost like these mirror events that happen throughout history where you know, the enemies of God go against Israel. God has to work miraculously in order to save Israel, and then the enemies are punished, kind of thing. And I think obviously we see that very clearly through Exodus, through the story of Passover. I think it's similar. On the eve of Passover, we had Iran trying to, and I say the eve of Passover, I mean a few days before Passover, obviously, but it was very close to Passover. You have an attempt by Iran to destroy Israel, or at least harm them in some way. Right now, you've got Israelis in captivity, held by Hamas, just like you're saying. And I think there is this sort of symbols there, like one day God is going to deal with these people. You know, we know actually when, you know, we were reading about it earlier with Joel, where all the nations go against Israel, like God will judge the nations for this. God will judge those who hurt the Jewish people because they are the apple of his eye. You know, when God says, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you, that is a true statement from the time of Moses all the way to today. And, you know, you cannot divorce that blessing or that warning, I guess, from the Jewish people. Like, if you mistreat the Jewish people, you will be judged by God. And, you know...
And we downplay the wrath of God often. And the whole... you know, there's a verse in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 27, it says, by faith, this is talking about Moses, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. So actually the wrath of God was of greater significance than the wrath from the Pharaoh. And we undermine the wrath of God, but God protected the Jewish people. He brought a covering from the wrath of God, which was placed upon the other peoples in Egypt as a consequence, direct consequence, of course, of Pharaoh. And we, you know, of course, we can symbolize that in Christianity. Of course, we understand, you know, about the blood of the Passover, and the substitution nature of that, and you know, the passing of, you know, the wrath of God in that sense, that we're forgiven, and we found grace and we found mercy. But you're absolutely right that we must not diminish the fact that God will judge the nations. He will judge righteously. And we've said this repeatedly, and we know Pastor Hagee speaks about this in such a wonderful way. The reminder that, you know, look at all the people, the nations, the regimes, the dictators that have come against the people of Israel. You know, where's Pharaoh? Where are the Egyptians? You know, where are the Romans? Where are the Nazis? Where are they now? And we know that there will be, you know, where will Hamas be? Well, I'll tell you what, unless they repent, you know, their end is going to be in the same destructive nature as every other entity that has come against Israel and against the God of Israel. So I
agree as well. And I think as well, a final thought from my perspective is, when we look at this, it's often viewed in a way which is anti-Israel or anti-Jews and things, which is true. It is that. But ultimately it's anti-God. Because it is God who said, these are my people, I have chosen you, I have given you this land, I will bless the nations through you. And it's Satan who wants to destroy the things of God. So we need to see this as, you know, it's not us standing with Israel, it's us standing with God.
Amen.
You know what I'm saying? It's, you know.
And also, I think we're also not sitting here, you know, feeling quite comfy that, oh, we're pro-Israel, we've got things right, and we're all safe and sound, and that's great, right? We should be filled with an absolute compassion, a compassion not to let things go, but a compassion that we will want to see hearts and minds changed, to acknowledge the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that there will be, you know, there are many people, anti-Semites, that are going against God and will be judged for their anti-Semitism. And, you know, part of our outworking is to, the least we can do is put the truth out, so that we might be able to make some impact in this nation, so that, you know, as a country, we will stand with Israel, we will stand with the Jewish people. We'll be able to demonstrate that, you know, we will not look the other way. We will not be like those that are presiding over these protests and saying, well, you know, you are openly Jewish. No, We want you to be openly Jewish. It's up to you as a Jewish people. It's up to you how visibly, openly Jewish you are. But we will stand with you.
Yeah.
And we will stand with you. And, at this Passover time, we will celebrate with you that God is faithful, that God keeps his promises, that he who has delivered Israel in the past is faithful and will show his deliverance again.
Yeah, I agree.
And we want to raise the banner of support for Israel in this nation to show the Jewish people that we are standing with them, and also to show Christians that we need to stand up against antisemitism and with the state of Israel.
Yeah.
And so to help us do that, we appreciate everyone that supports this ministry here at Christians United for Israel. And so we would ask you to please consider donating to the work at www.cufi.org.uk/donate, and consider any gift that you are able to give at this time, or maybe even consider becoming a partner by setting up a monthly donation. And of course, we would really be thankful if you could like, share, subscribe, comment. Yep. and anything else, just to make this podcast more widely known. And to end with, there was outside Downing Street a table of 133 places laid out immaculately in order to celebrate Passover. But every 133 of those seats was left empty. They were left empty because of the 133 hostages that are in Gaza. Some of the places had cutlery, wine glasses, and wine. And some of them had baby bottles and baby toys and crayons. In order to honour all of those that are held hostage during this Passover and who are not at home with their families where they should be.
Yeah.
It was a very moving thing to have and to see outside Downing Street. But there is a tradition among many Jewish families of actually having a seat which is left vacant for those family members who cannot attend and cannot participate in the Passover meal. So almost this long stretched table outside Downing Street of 133 empty spaces was sort of a link to that tradition as well. And at this particular time, I know that many Jewish families, that empty seat was not just for a missing family member, but was to remember the hostages. Now, whether you observe a Passover meal yourself or not at home, perhaps tonight, when you're at home and you're having your meal, maybe just set some time aside just to pray for the hostages, for the people of Israel, and for the deliverance of all those who are held captive in Gaza, and to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. God bless you.